Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to The Walk. Today is Tuesday, January 24th, and yesterday I gave you this question. I'm trying to figure out what the sheep pen represents in John 10, verse 9. So to review, this is what the verse says in the ESV. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. So I've figured out that the word pasture represents when you're being fed spiritually. It's that time when you are in God's presence. And when I think of a pasture, I think of a very big, massive, wide open field. The sheep can kind of spread out and all have their own space. I would think that that would be the more dangerous place as opposed to the sheep pen. Now, the question I had was, what does the sheep pen represent? And as I prayed over it and I researched it and I read about it, one of the things that I learned was that the sheep, several different flocks would be put together in a pen. And those flocks would know their particular shepherd's voice. So that shepherd would come to the gate of that sheep pen and call for their sheep, and their sheep would come out and all the others would ignore the voice. Jesus said, "My sheep know my voice." So as we think this through, and then they would leave these sheep with like a hired person that would protect it. And that person would guard the opening. Now, the opening wasn't necessarily a gate that kind of swings open and shut. It was more of a break in the wall where you could walk through. And in order to keep the sheep in the pen, this person would sleep in the opening so that the sheep would not step over this person. So that would keep the sheep in the pen until the shepherds return and they called for them. So as I'm thinking this through, this is representative of the second coming. Jesus is going to come back and he's going to call his bride to him. We're going to be raptured. So we know that that's coming. We know that that's part of this. What is this sheep pen though? What does it represent? Well, when you've got several different flocks that are put together and they don't all belong to the good shepherd, what does that mean? It means the world. And as I continued to pray over this, continued to really think about this, the sheep pen's going to be a much smaller area than the pasture. Think about the difference in the proportions. It's easy to be mixed up in with the world, and it feels like it's such a massive, huge thing to keep yourself out of that world, to not be a part of that world, but to stay focused on Jesus. But the pasture is so much larger. God's presence can be anywhere. And those worldly desires, they're only here in this temporary earthly life. It's not a part of our eternal life. That pasture is a part of our eternal life. That's why it's so huge. It's so massive. And the sheep pen is very boxed in. It's very restricted. It only goes so far. And as I thought about that, it made me realize that it's so much like that spirit of religion. That spirit of religion says God only does so much. God only goes so far. And we can keep control over what God's doing because we're not going to believe in the miracles. We're not going to believe in the visions. We're not going to believe in the prophecy. But we're stuck in this world. We're stuck in that sheep pen until he calls us. And when he calls us, we go to that pasture. We're called to him on a daily basis. And we get to be in his presence on a daily basis. All because we belong to him. All because we know his voice. And while we're in that sheep pen, we get to tell others about how to hear his voice and how to be aware of it. And some of them are people that are already going to church every week. My goodness, some of them could even be pastors, and they're not truly hearing his voice because they're stuck in that spirit of religion. So we need to pray for these people that are not able to hear his voice. We need to go into our prayer closets today and be praying for them in a bold and dynamic way. We're right there with them in the sheep pen until he calls us. And when he calls us, then we're in his presence. So we've got to be aware of the fact that we can keep teaching them how to recognize that voice. Keep talking about recognizing that voice because they need to know and they're not really sure about it. And many of them are already believers. They're going to church on a weekly basis, but they keep God in that pen. They keep God in that box. He doesn't belong in there. He's part of that pasture, that wide, wide, vast open field with no beginning and no end, no top, no bottom. He's limitless. And so are the miracles. Have a wonderful day. God bless, and keep walking the walk.